trust the breakfast is to your liking. It certainly is to mine. I think we're going to start with the proceedings. So the first speaker is George Gabriel, who's going to be talking about co-working space and putting co-working into context. George, over to you.
I assume someone will tell me when I'm almost out of time. Cool. This is a selfie that I took 36 years ago. That's me in the blue shirt there. And this was my first experience of co-working. It's called My Family. We had a lot of HR issues, still do. But nonetheless, I like to share this as the first picture in this presentation because as a social anthropologist, it's important to sort of get at least a picture of where I come from, because that's also a big part of the decision-making process we make when we're going to design the spaces where we work and create the kind of lives that we want. 35 years later, I'm now the oldest one in the picture. Those are my 4 boys. I have a bit of a complicated life. The 2 oldest ones live in Norway, the 2 youngest ones here in South Africa. I just commented about the fact that, that I came to South Africa for the first time 9 years ago on a bit of an adventure. I had just been offered the position of headmaster at a private Waldorf boarding school. It would take me a long time to explain exactly what that means, but to put it mildly, to put it simply, I came here for a week and a half because of some connections I had to artists who had come and visited our school in Norway a number of times. And so I spent time in Cape Town, and then I went up to Johannesburg. I'm here now permanently because I'm now married to the woman who I sat next to on the flight from Cape Town to Johannesburg. Which was possible because of technology, which is a key part of the discussion that we're having. All of this change is happening because of the fact that most of you have phones that are more powerful than the technology that we had when the first man was put on the moon. As a social anthropologist, I love what's referred to today as wicked problems. In South Africa, you have wicked problems. And as someone who lives here and loves living here, I'm part of the problem, I'm part of the solution. A wicked problem is something that is incredibly complex to solve and incredibly important that we do solve. It's a meaningful issue that we care about. Poverty, environment, mental health. And yet, when you start to address it, it feels impossible. So you have to look at it from different perspectives. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but for those of you who had the privilege of attending the design thinking talk a few months ago, there's a wonderful book that GTP has put out that goes into these types of issues and how to address them. And wicked problems, at the end of the day, has to be solved by what is a bit of a buzzword today, and yet incredibly important: collaboration. Collaboration does not mean we're not competitive, but it means we're working together to solve wicked problems. In that process, you can be incredibly competitive. So a key part of succeeding is synergy. Synergy is the effect that happens when, let's take a sports metaphor, you lose a player, and that team plays so well together, it feels like that player is still on the field. You feel like there's extra help. That, to me, is the only way to go about solving very difficult problems, is by nurturing synergy through collaboration. I first heard about co-working 6 years ago while I was living in Norway, at the time that I was planning my transition to live here full-time. And I fell in love with the idea because I had done research on what in the United States was called intentional communities, which comes out of the 1960s hippie movement, where people decided to live together and create alternative communities. Interestingly enough, for a lot of the really interesting work that's being done around organizational development comes from people who lived in those communities, discovered new methods for conflict resolution, values-based decision-making, et cetera, and put themselves into experimental, innovative spaces. Yeah, there might have been drugs and free love and all that, but that's neither here nor there when we put it into the context of where change comes from. So I fell in love with the idea of co-working, and I moved to Cape Town. Like my father, who had moved from Hungary to the States as an immigrant, I came with grand ideas, big hope, and very little capital. Oh, sorry. Why I fell in love with co-working is based in this map. Okay? How many can read Norwegian? No, fine. So this is from a co-working space called 657 Oslo that started in 2012. In 2013, they posted this on their Facebook page. What is co-working? We asked everyone who sits at 657 whether or not collaboration works for them and have they collaborated with anyone else sitting in this space. All of those arrows represent paid projects where the people sitting in the space work together. That's a space that was open for less than a year when that map got up. I thought that was very impressive. And interesting to me as someone who at the time was already doing independent consulting work and recognizing that working in a network makes more sense. So when I came to Cape Town, I had a connection and I approached Daddy's World. Some of you may know them from the hospitality business. They created Daddy Longlegs, Old McDaddy, the Old Biscuit Mill. Since then, Woodstock Exchange. They own the River Club, which has just announced a 4 billion rand expansion plan. And much of their work is seen as the impetus for the change of regeneration that has taken place on Long Street and in Woodstock. The Old Biscuit Mill is celebrating 10-year anniversary this year. To me, as someone who comes from the States, that's a very slow regeneration process. But it is about to kick into high gear because the one thing that hasn't been happening in Woodstock that was needed is residential development. You are going to see, if I understand the estimate, within the next 5 years, at least 5,000 apartments being built in Woodstock alone, which is going to lead to other problems. But, I mean, that's just how it is. Gentrification, you're always displacing someone in doing this. So I approached them, but the reason I approached them is because of this man. That is Ian Schrager. Ian Schrager is the reason we're sitting here today. Ian Schrager, in the late 1970s, teamed up with a guy named Steve Rubel, and Ian Schrager and Steve Rubel opened Studio 54 Disco in New York City. Studio 54 became very famous, infamous, not only because of all the hip stars that went there, but they also designed it with creatives. Ian Schrager and Steve Rubel, well, they ended up in jail for a little while, but that's a side issue. But they had so much money that they were like, what's next for us? Now, it so happened that my father was a hotel consultant. And they came to my father and said, we'd like to open a hotel, but we want to do it differently. So if you look up Ian Schrager in his Wikipedia page, he is credited as being the founder of the boutique hotel idea. They opened Morgan's in 1984 by bringing creatives into the design process of something that had been a very traditional market up until then, hotels. And they created a look, the shabby chic look, that allowed the incredibly wealthy and the not so wealthy to intermingle. And one of their big things they did was they recreated the lobby. as a place to meet. So I have always been inspired by Ian Schrager, and it occurred to me that co-working was really not a change in serviced office. Well, it was, but what it was a marriage between hospitality and serviced office. This guy got it right, and it made sense to me to go to the local capitalists who also had gotten it right. They understood that you could create fun spaces in a creative way and charge prices that were reasonable. I mean, Old McDaddy, if you don't know it, in Elgin, Caravan Trailer Park, is booked forever, and it's basically $8.95 a night. You know, it's not that expensive. And each caravan, hand-picked by Jody, one of the owners in the United States, brought over, physically put into place. He was part of that entire design process, and that was very important for me as well. I wanted to have partners who understood how to build. So the intention was to put it at Woodstock Exchange. For those of you who haven't been to Workshop 17, that's one world, incredibly important, as is Workshop 17's placement within the V&A waterfront. Woodstock Exchange is also incredibly important because in an article that came out about a year ago talking about co-working spaces, it refers to the 12,000 square meter Woodstock Exchange as a co-working village because it has everything. It has office space, it has residential, it has places to eat, places to meet, etc. Unfortunately, Bandwidth Barn decided to move in, and so we decided to wait, and we opened up. It always looks so depressing without people, but Daddy-O at the old biscuit mill, 250 square meters, space for about 25 people, and we were up and running for 3 years. It never made money, never came close to making money. But it created a network, and it was the owner's initiative was to support entrepreneurship. It didn't make money for reasons that Wesley can explain, but put simply, it was too small. Like any other place, it has to be run with a certain scale in order to make money. But it was a fantastic opportunity for me and a very interesting experience as someone who ran it, not necessarily on a daily basis, but was responsible for it. There were an incredible amount of learnings from doing that. But I wanted to take things to the next level. Because it was occurred to me that if we were going to make change happen, you needed to do it through acceleration. And acceleration happens by the way people support each other in a co-working ecosystem. This is one of the maps of the co-working ecosystem. There are a bunch of these. This one was created by Standard Bank, or the head of incubation at Standard Bank. And here we see what the network is that exists around innovation. Okay? I have 4 or 5 other maps similar to this. You've got networking pipeline partners, you've got educational institutions, incubators and accelerators, private sector, public sector, entrepreneurship and youth development companies. Co-working isn't even on the map yet as spaces. But these spaces are incredibly important, and how they get developed and what partnerships get developed are incredibly important. So as an example, Daddy-O, very small. It was, as is often the case, you have to have an agreement with the landlord to make it work, especially at the outset. But then many other spaces throughout, certainly the Cape Town region, are based on a model of sponsorship in some form. So for example, UCT GSB, that has solution space with MTN very closely involved. I ended up fortuitously at Rise Cape Town, which is on the 5th floor of the Woodstock Exchange. I was invited in to be their resident social anthropologist, so to speak, and I run a monthly organizational development sort of discussion session for them around HR issues, because that's a love and a passion of mine, and as well as I see that for startups and pre-existing businesses, it's an area where there's not enough work being done, and so we created this event so that people could kind of have a taster of different types of methodologies that exist. It's a fantastic space. It is sponsored by Barclays Bank. There are 7 of them around the world. Its intention is innovation in the fintech ecosystem. This is a small piece of what it looks like here in South Africa. I raise this as an incredibly important question that GTP needs to answer in all of its research and engagement with the region, is to think about, as it wants to develop a co-working space, what's the focus going to be and who are the players? So the important thing for GTP now is to get on one of these maps and perhaps even design their own map around the way the Tygerberg region can work together on this. Because at the end of the day, co-working is not about everyone's going to sit in the same space. It's about the entire support structure and ecosystem around it. A critically important part of a good co-working space is the host or the community manager. I'll give a quick example of that. Camilla, who is the manager at Barclays Rise, is amazing. And she's amazing because she's not only a fabulous host, she also happens to be a local expert on fintech. She comes from the experience with the Bertha Center at UCT GSB, and she knows people. So last week, I get an email from the technical director of President Obama's Presidential Innovation Fellows, who happens to be vacationing in South Africa right now. He's going to be in Cape Town next week. Could we get together? So at an event that we had at Rise on Thursday, I'm sitting with Camilla as she is WhatsApping people to come to have drinks with this guy on Friday. And that is acceleration. Now, that's not supporting a business, but it could be. We don't exactly know what's going to come of that conversation. All we know is someone who's very committed to these ideals of innovation, using technology in a position of power from the United States is coming to talk. Let's meet, and let's pull, quote unquote, the right people into the room and provide that opportunity to startups as well as existing businesses. Another thing that Barclays can do is it can sign contracts. So they run an accelerator, and twice a year bring 10 companies, 10 startups, or businesses that are pre-existing, but it's still relatively in startup phase, and support them for 3 months with intensive networking, skills development, et cetera, with the goal being of these guys are innovating, they're going to, quote unquote, disrupt the financial technology market. We want to know what's going on, and potentially, we want a piece of the action. As a social anthropologist, what's important to me is understanding this in an even broader context. And the even broader context is evolution. We have changed from hunter-gatherer to agrarian to industrial to, and there are 17 books out there more, whether you want to call this communication or the fourth industrial revolution or the dream stage or whatever, there's lots of work on this. The point is, we leave the Garden of Eden, we change from an instinctual way of being, and we walk this road of developing ourselves. First, it's all about the apple, the hunter-gatherer era. How do we find this apple? Where do we look for this apple? Then we develop a culture, an agrarian culture, which you can feel when you look outside. Things start to get more ordered. Society and culture develops further. Industrial era, as I drove here from Cape Town and look at the Table Mountain with a rainbow in front of it, gorgeous. And then I look at, and then I come here to this agrarian era, gorgeous, and we all like to be a part of this. But on the way, I pass a huge petroleum plant, if that's the correct way of calling it, which is also a key part of this whole story. So each stage of human cultural development is like a classroom in which we learn certain skills and tasks. I'm not going to go into any more detail about this, but I'm going to give a very quick example. The United States of America is a designed culture. They had a wicked problem. They had a boss that they hated. So a bunch of entrepreneurs got together and designed a new form of government. Al Gore, former Vice President of the United States, calls it technology. Culture is how organizations do things. That's the most basic definition. Culture design is being conscious of the fact that we're designing culture all the time. The tradition, for most people, is past, and we can now decide to start a new business, to start a new life in a new place, to change what we eat, to change our religion. We can pick and choose, but it's important to know how to do it. And my point is, for GTP, it's incredibly important to think about all the different aspects of how you put a culture together so that the space that gets created, the ecosystem that it supports, works well to create accelerated change to deal with wicked problems so that you end up with some solutions that can be tested. Co-working is far more than just a great new way to work. Co-working is a fundamental driver in the emergence of the new sharing economy. The spaces are each a hub in complex and rapidly evolving business development ecosystems. They are learning communities specifically designed so that their members and extended network develop business synergies that would otherwise not be possible. Thank you.
Hi guys, good morning. I'm not going to delve too much into what co-working is. I think culturally it was really well addressed. And if you haven't been to a co-working space, I really suggest Cape Town's got a huge amount of them to offer. Workshop 17 is just one in a variety of spaces that go from hot desking, anti-establishment, very kind of basic spaces, all the way through to very high-end spaces like the Inner City Ideas Cartel. But for those people that don't know what co-working is and why it's different to traditional office, is just a quick snapshot of the idea of what it is. Every corporate, every individual business that's kind of gone previously, prior to co-working in South Africa, and co-working in South Africa is very immature. So in about 6 or 7 years, it's only started growing. But from a traditional office space standpoint, everyone had their own desk. Everyone's got their own resource. And this is actually a huge waste of space. And also, ideally, most people don't use their desk or an office or a meeting room all the time. And you get a huge amount of wasted time in individual areas. Where co-working has the ability to share ideas and share culture, the idea is to share resources. And as a startup, and having created 3 other businesses prior to starting building shared offices, sharing a resource that you can't necessarily afford yourself is a cornerstone of what co-working is. You don't want to share a resource that you can go and buy a chair at Macro and a table at Macro and then share it amongst 3 or 4 of you. Although that's exactly how co-working started in San Francisco 25 years ago. Sharing resources is a fundamental element of what co-working has become in this greater sharing economy. The idea is also to create a level playing field. There's no hierarchy in co-working. There's no corner offices. There's no CEO that sits in a corner office and delegates down. Our biggest resources and our most prominent spaces, particularly in Opening Maboneng and Workshop 17, is shared, and it can't be owned by any particular individual or any particular company. There's also in traditional office-based terms, we value a space based on square meterage, based on location. Where co-working, it's more of a gym membership. Think of it like a gym for work. You have a membership based on your company needs and based on your individual needs, and you get access to space, access to people, access to platforms, both physical and digital, where traditional office space just gives you a per square meter rate, and you have to bring everything else in. We have the biggest thing with co-working, and I think in South Africa it's primarily the focus right now, is the flexibility. There's no long-term contracts. There's no idea of committing for 2 years or 3 years or even a year for that matter. The access is daily, weekly, or monthly. And those entrepreneurs have the ability to fail and fail quickly. And that is vital. Particularly if you're trying to foster innovation, foster entrepreneurship, you can't hamstring entrepreneurs to sign a long-term contract because they can't get their idea into the market, let alone test the idea. And if they're signing a 3-year lease, then the idea for them, the barrier to entry is so much greater. So co-working allows entrepreneurs to fail quick, and failing is not a problem. Failing is encouraged because then you move on from your idea, you create something new, or you pivot into something else. And that's where co-working has a massive, massive play in helping entrepreneurs grow and ideally helping businesses grow and ideas generate faster and businesses pivoting into other spaces. Our legacy was in a rejuvenated area of Johannesburg, Maboneng. For those of you in Cape Town that haven't been to Maboneng, it's very similar to Woodstock, except it's independently owned by a single developer, Perpetuity. So we were there pretty much from day one in 2011. We took on a 1,000 square meter facility, and I'll get into the sizing, which was talked about a little bit earlier. But it took us 2 years to break even. And the main reason is that, like Woodstock, the city of Joburg is a very scary place to come if you haven't been born in the city or you haven't lived in the city, and particularly generations of yesteryear that grew up in Joburg, that partied in Joburg in the 70s and 80s. It's turned on its head in the 80s and 90s and the noughties. So people weren't going back into the city. But in 2011, Jonathan Liebman from Perpetuity decided he's going to recreate a precinct. He's going to build a precinct starting with Arts on Main. Then he slowly but surely got a little bit of traction in 2010, 2011 by creating a creative hub for artists, both from graphic design all the way through to William Kentridge, who's got his studio there. And that shifted his focus to say, well, actually people want to be back in the city. People want to be working in close proximity to other like-minded individuals. And he started buying up more property. And he bought property at actually stupid rates, 3,000 Rand a square meter for 10,000 squares, and he bought buildings upon buildings. By the time we were there in 2011, he'd already bought 14 buildings in JP's Town. He'd only developed 2 of them. Currently, they own 48 buildings in the city of Johannesburg, and currently about 28 of those are under development, and the others are kind of sitting on the back burner. In 2011, we triggered a purchase of the Main Change building, which is 5,600 square meter facility, all in light industrial space. We signed an offer to purchase the 4th floor, which triggered the purchase for Perpetuity to buy that building. So we became an anchor tenant for the first 2 or 3 years. In our calculations, you have to have a bare minimum staff complement to make a facility like a co-working space work. You absolutely hit the nail on the head. We're not in a shared office space business. We're in the hospitality business. You service a need and a requirement, but you don't do it in a way that is, here's your space, walk in, and we'll answer the phone for you. You're there, you welcome, you got hosts, you got IT support, you've got a huge array of services that you wouldn't traditionally have in a normal office environment. And because you're in a shared environment, you need those services because as a startup, you can't afford them yourself. You don't want to be burdening your own business with HR costs and staffing costs. So co-working plays an important role to have those costs internalized. And if, as a co-working space, you have to internalize those costs, and therefore having a bigger space allows you to reach a profitable area a lot quicker than a smaller space does. So we had 4 people working for us in Open Maboneng. And unfortunately, in the first 2 years, we didn't make money. We didn't make money on co-working, at least. What we found very interesting is that co-working spaces in Maboneng was a destination, and people didn't know what co-working was, so we had to introduce it to them. And the best way to introduce co-working to people is to host events. So we had a huge amount of corporate partners. Joburg CBD's got kind of the biggest concentration of our banks and the mining sector, so we hosted those people in our space quite regularly. Turned our co-working space into a venue for corporates to host events, meetings. So it became very much a destination space for people to have internal meetings and external strategy sessions. And slowly but surely over the course of 2013, more and more people started coming to the space that worked there. Funnily enough, Deloitte actually had a membership with us before, it had 10 memberships with us before we had 10 independent companies with us. So they had their offsite innovation team work out of our space in Joburg because they found it more creative. They found it better, more conducive to developing ideas and generating content and creating their next evolution of their own business. So I would never recommend starting a co-working space business in a rejuvenated area. If it's your first business, or if your first co-working space, don't do it. It's a lot of learnings. It was a huge uphill battle. But without those lessons, we wouldn't have moved to Workshop 17. And the reason we moved to Workshop 17 is that we were approached by the V&A Waterfront to collaborate on an idea to create an entrepreneurial hub in the waterfront. And this was long before we came along, they had the idea of creating. So it was about a 7-year lead time from when the idea was generated to where we were last year when we launched in April. But without the success and without cutting our teeth in Joburg and without making the learnings of what co-working actually is in a country that is very new in co-working, we would never have had the opportunity to partner with an entity like the V&A Waterfront. Now, from not breaking even for 2 years, we broke even in 2 months at the V&A waterfront. The space in the V&A waterfront is 3,500 square meters. And it just goes to show that it's two things there. Location, location, location is vital to a co-working space. If you've got a hub and you've got traffic, you've got foot traffic, you've got businesses in the area, there's also a massive tourist destination, so it was easy for people to get the traction that you wanted. The second most important thing is that when you have scalability in size, a 1,000 square meter facility has a minimum of 4 to 6 staff. We've got 7 staff that work permanently at Workshop 17. So to add more space, you don't have to necessarily add more people. Your services, everything is on site. All you have to do is open new internet ports, furnish a new space, renovate it, and off you go. The people there already know how to serve. So we've got 2 community managers. Nicole is our community manager at Workshop 17. She manages 285 individuals, 87 companies. And then we've got our assistant community manager, which is actually a help desk person that helps onboard people. If there's troubleshooting, she goes. We've got a full-time IT person that makes sure that there's support as well. And there's a whole bunch of other people scattered around the space, including cleaners and baristas. Workshop 17 is an anomaly. It is currently the biggest co-working space in South Africa, and I think it's only the second biggest in Africa right now from a member point of view. From a physical space point of view, it is the biggest in Africa. But I say it's an anomaly because you shouldn't break even in 2 or 3 months. The waterfront, it will never happen again. And we've been mapping these out now for the last 3 years, and where we see ourselves in 5 years' time is it's going to take us at least a year to kind of get to 60 to 70% capacity. It's an anomaly because it's the waterfront. You've got 24 million visitors a year there. And the idea for us is, how do we go about replicating the middle ground between Open Maboneng and Workshop 17? And what is that middle ground? And there's a few key ingredients for that middle ground to be successful. And the first and foremost is coffee. An entrepreneur is only successful if he's caffeinated. Because they work 16 to 20 hours a day, they work 7 days a week, and access to good coffee is the bloodline of an entrepreneur. Internet speed, without access to information, without access to data, without access to an external community outside of your physical environment, an entrepreneur can't be successful. And we all have technology. All of us have got our phones. We've got 3 or 4 devices: phone, computer, desktop, iPad. Without technology, we're not successful. And without access to technology, we're not successful. So we were very fortunate. In Maboneng, funnily enough, we actually didn't have fiber in the city. There's a lot of copper. There's actually R1 trillion of underutilized infrastructure in Joburg CBD, which is quite phenomenal. But we actually laid, so my business partner, Mark, is an IT buff and systems engineer by profession. He laid fiber. He invested his own money and tried to build a network in the Joburg CBD, which he sold a couple of years ago. So we were getting 150 megabits per second in 2012. The only company that outperformed us was Investec. That still didn't draw enough people into the city, which goes to show that if you don't have the right area along with the right services, you're going to fall short. Talking on that same point, a big part of a rejuvenated area success is what happens around it. So the restaurants, the community that's built, but most importantly is the security. If you try and invite people outside of that rejuvenated area back into your city or back into the area that you're rejuvenating, security is paramount. And police force in Joburg was not great. So they hired private security. So we had private security on every street corner, and we paid a premium for that as tenants. But that was kind of the success after 2 years when you realized that was really what the biggest barrier to entry was: safety. And second and third most important for an entrepreneur is the team that supports them, which is kind of the community manager, the cleaning staff, the baristas, and that was our team, the top right-hand corner there. So Mark, Paul, and myself. At the time, it was Jessica, who was our community manager, Margaret, who actually was Mark's domestic worker, then moved to a barista. She self-trained herself to make coffees. Headed our cleaning department for Open Maboneng. She's now our events manager and will be probably appointed general manager of the space next year in a period of 4 years, which is a really awesome story. And then Tembi's one of our cleaners that's also been with us for many years. There's one person that's missing from that original photo. His name is Eric, but he wasn't on site the day that we took the photos. But importantly is having a team of people that support entrepreneurs in a co-working space. I'll jump into numbers a bit later, but what's interesting is that co-working can be far more profitable than a general per square meter rental. But the thing is that your operational costs are so much greater. and your lead time to get that break-even point is greater because of the people that are there. But without the people there, you're not going to encourage people to come back. The clients that are coming for meetings that aren't members aren't going to come back. The members are going to feel that they're getting neglected, and they can go get the same service, actually maybe even better service at a coffee shop. So the people are absolutely vital. And then another important thing about a co-working space is what I think that Open has been successful doing is it's been able to pivot its business in a way that makes sure it makes money in the early stages in order to be successful long term. Co-working for us was always a testing ground. Maboneng was a lab for us. We had no idea what to expect in 2012 when we launched, but in order for us to be successful, we had to pivot into the events business. We actually became a venue for Maboneng. We became a destination for a space where people wanted to host meetings rather than work from. And eventually, we shifted into a space that people wanted to work from. Currently, we've got 64 members in Maboneng that are full-time, 23, 24 members that are part-time, and 2 corporate partners that work from the space. And one of them is the Dutch Embassy. We just did a big launch for them last week, Thursday. And they sponsor 15 entrepreneurs. So we've actually only got 15 entrepreneurs of about 100 are paid for by someone else. Everyone else pays for themselves. But that took us 4.5 years to get there. So just kind of the trends that I'm seeing right now in an entrepreneurial space, and I'm not going to go through all of them. You can kind of have a look at them yourself and kind of take the ones that talk to you. But intrinsic motivation for working is around passion and curiosity. So people do what they want to do because they're passionate about it and because they're curious. They want to figure things out. And that's a huge, huge factor in designing a co-working space. What we see now is it's no longer a melting pot of one size fits all and come one, come all to the same space. Maboneng was designed around that. It was designed around there's no barrier to entry, whether you're a person that's owned a business before or you've got an idea for a business. As long as you can pay the membership, you can come in and work. Where Workshop 17 has been a little bit different is there's been an application process. There's been a self-filtering process in order for people to apply for space. We vet them, whether or not they add value to the ecosystem, whether or not they add value to the other entrepreneurs in the space, whether they're not cannibalizing other opportunities for other entrepreneurs. We're not saying it's not competitive. We've got 5 or 6 technology businesses in Workshop 17 that pretty much are competitive to each other, but they're not cannibalizing because it's not the dominant player. Of the 280 members, 87 companies in Workshop 17, there's no more than 5 in the same field. And that's on purpose, because you want to be able to curate the space in order to be successful. Our shift, and you talked about 8 locations that are coming online in the next kind of 2 to 3 years, the idea for us is that each location will have a particular focus. It won't be primarily focused, it won't just be fintech, but it will be creative culture or creative industries or financial services and technology. I think Belleville and the Greater Tygerberg area has got a huge biotech and health tech focus, and I think that should be the focus for co-working space in that area, but it shouldn't be the only focus. Because the problem is, as soon as you isolate yourself with one sector, one industry, it becomes a silo, and then innovation kind of disappears. You want to be working alongside different individuals, different people that think differently. A very successful university space based in Toronto is called the Digital Media Zone. And that's a 7-story facility that has got every single sector focus, everything from fashion through to robotics. And what was interesting is that the fashion and robotics department or working spaces and innovation spaces were alongside each other. Because you've got this incredibly creative-focused individual and a technology-focused individual that's also got a creative brain, and you put them together and they form really awesome ideas and synergies. And that's the idea with co-working, is that you want to create an ability for people to meet other individuals that they wouldn't meet in their normal course of business. And we call it synchronicity or accidental meetings. And when these accidental meetings happen, real interesting things occur. Where Open is different to a lot of co-working spaces, we're not sponsored, we're self-funded. So we self-funded our space in Open Maboneng. We partnered with the V&A Waterfront, but we're also independent. We're not an incubator, we're not an accelerator. We're a platform. We allow people to plug in. That's why the first iteration of RISE, which was Tech for Africa, utilized our space, which was sponsored by Barclays, but at the same time, Standard Bank's incubator, SW7, was also housed in the same area. If those banks were to work in the same building, it wouldn't happen, because there's this ability, this idea of intellectual property. And where co-working space has the ability to be a neutral player in this very complex, sometimes very egocentric space where businesses don't want to partner with other businesses because their competitors are already in that sector or already in bed with that potential client, we provide that platform that is completely neutral. We don't eat anyone's lunch because we don't facilitate these kind of incubators, accelerators. We provide really cool space and a hospitality environment for people to feel comfortable in. So trends I'm seeing right now in the commercial property, and what was interesting, on Friday last week, I read an article about Regis. Now, Regis has got 2,400 spaces around the world, and it's very traditional office space, cubicle-based, not really co-working, but they've just signed a deal with Redefined Properties for 4,500 square meters, 7 new facilities, and they can do that because it's smaller facilities, because they pretty much create 6 or 8 square meter offices, and they rent them out for 25,000 rand a pop. And that doesn't include your internet. But what we're seeing right now is that there's a capacity is growing, and old assumptions are still being used. More and more buildings are being built for office. There's more buildings that are being built for mixed use, which is really interesting and really exciting. But what's happening is it's cannibalizing the current corporate world. And we're seeing that businesses are moving from old offices into more centralized areas. I was in Sandton last week, and I counted 19 new cranes. I saw Sasol's new offices. And what's happening is that those buildings that they were in are now being underutilized, and landlords don't know what to do with them. And they're wanting to rent them out in 100 or 200 square meter pockets, but entrepreneurs don't have the ability to sign a lease at 120 Rand a square meter at 100 squares when you're 8 people. This doesn't make sense. Office needs are changing. I mean that because a person wants to come into an office space, not necessarily furnished, but they want everything there. They want their telephone there, internet services there, and they want access to potential other services, concierge, or restaurants, places for their employees to park or eat. But office spaces currently, and to the extent that 5 or 6 years ago, haven't taken those things into account. There's a growing number of entrepreneurs and free agents that won't buy into traditional office spaces. They want a community. They don't want to be isolated. That's why they enjoy coffee shops, because they like the energy, they like the vibrance, they like the idea of a person sitting next to them doing something similar or different, but working to the same goal, trying to be successful in their own rights. The value proposition is not matching a growing part of the demand. And when I say that, is that we have to shift the thinking between what office is now and what we want office to be, and that also includes co-working. Co-working space is one part of office. An entrepreneur can't be in a co-working space for their entire lifespan. It's just not sustainable because it's membership-based. The more people you employ, the more money you pay. Eventually, it makes more sense to have your own space. But what we find interesting now at Workshop 17 and in Maboneng is that people want to be close to those shared services. They want to be close to the community. And what we're looking at now is how do we go about creating that first layer of co-working in 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 square meter facility, but then have access to more dedicated spaces at better rates for entrepreneurs as hopefully they expand their business. So if you're looking to create the continuum of space for an entrepreneur, it's essentially from the coffee shop where they don't have to pay anything, they get free internet, through to the hot desking space, which is an unowned seat in a physical environment that's a little bit more premium, through to a dedicated environment or dedicated office, into a serviced office or just a big open plate where a person can come in but still connect to the shared meeting rooms, internet service providers, the call answering services, the shared IT individual. And that's important, and that's what we're seeing is happening in New York right now with WeWork. WeWork was valued at $16 billion, 5 years old. It's the fastest growing, biggest co-working business in the world. And they just took a lease of 250,000 square feet. So it's about 25,000 square meters in New York City. And that's also a partnership with a property owner. But they've also gone into live, which is a key element of what people want to do. We want to live, work, and play in the same environment. And that's where Woodstock is very exciting. And also what could be very exciting with the Great Tigerberg partnership is how do you create an environment where you can live, work, and play in close proximity, where you can walk to work from your apartment or just go down the elevator into your office, where you go down to the street corner for a cup of coffee or for breakfast or lunch. And you really don't have to move out of the same building or the same block or the same precinct to get everything you need. And that's just convenience. Now, yes, we want to go out to the winelands, we want to go out and get away from our kind of comfort zones, but for the most part, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, if you don't have to move out of a single building environment because everything's there, it makes life easy. And for an entrepreneur, that is easy because you want to be working as many hours a day as you can, be as close to home as possible, and not have to worry about anything else around you. So co-working is the answer for a lot of property owners and also to kind of create this idea of shared resources. What's interesting is how do we create co-working as a destination, though? And I think that's the biggest challenge you have with Belleville and the Greater Tygerberg area is you have to make sure that it has a particular focus. And when I say biotech and health tech, that should be the focus, and that should be the draw card, because you've got a huge amount of tertiary institutions here. There's, I think at last count, it was like 11 or 17. Lyle, you got the figures at the top of your head, but it's amazing how many institutions are in the area. And that's where partnerships come into play very, very successfully, where you can have access to potential laboratories or have access to potential services for these universities in a shared space that they can utilize. And finding property partners is going to become easier and easier with the likes of Redefine partnering with Regis, with the likes of WeWork partnering with property owners in international waters. Property owners have got access to a huge amount of property, not necessarily available bulk, but they don't know what to do with it. And it requires entrepreneurs, co-working spaces to come in and say, this is what we think, this is our vision. How do you see about this partnering? That's where Workshop 17 was successful. We were approached by a big property owner at the V&A waterfront and said, this is what we'd like to do, we don't know how to do it, can you help us? And we form a joint venture where there's upside for them because the property price increases, because the value of the property increases, because it gets utilized. And it creates a really awesome energy in the space. And from a vacant piece of land, becomes a very, very key resource within the greater ecosystem. So some of the challenges we faced is particularly trying to finance, and if you can't finance your own co-working space, which we tried many things. So 5 years ago, we went everywhere from the Vomela Fund to F&B to private individuals, angel investors to try to fund it. We invested 4 million rand of our own money to develop our space in Maboneng. And what's interesting is that people are so keen to try to find ways to work. The banks want to invest. They want to say, yeah, here's your debt funding, we'll happily give it to you. Goes past credit, goes above credit's head, then goes back to credit, then credit can't find a way to do it. Because the fact is that banks don't take a lease under 2 years as a value. A month-to-month lease doesn't have any weight for them. So thankfully now we've got a book value, and our net asset value is kind of shooting the lights out because we've been successful the last 3 years. But starting a co-working space means you have to have access to your own capital, because it's very unlikely that the banks are going to give you debt funding. And also, it's very unlikely that angel investors are going to understand what co-working is, because those guys are kind of also Stellenbosch Mafia side as well. And it's trying to encourage them what it means and how the value actually transpires is quite a difficult task to do. But getting the right mix of people will make a massive difference in a co-working space. And it's also a challenge in and of itself, because you don't want to be exclusive. You want to be in an inclusive environment. You want to allow people to come in regardless of background, regardless of creed, regardless of education. But if you just invite any person into the space, you're not going to get the value that you would if you curate it a little bit. And it's not about saying no. It's about saying maybe something different. And that's where the value of having multiple spaces in multiple locations allows you to shift people into an environment that might better serve them and also better serve the community at large. And it's also about getting the right decision makers into the space. So it's one thing to have a group of entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs need services. The entrepreneurs need advice. They need mentorship. We often do things that we do ourselves very well, but we lack certain skills, whether it be sales skills, HR skills, whether it just be the ability to write a business plan. We've got different ideas. So having those skills, having those individuals, having those mentors in a space is also quite key. And that's where corporate partners come in quite a lot. And they can provide those services. And they actually have a duty to provide some of those services as part of their enterprise development. And it's quite easy to tap into those, which took us about 2.5 years to figure out, but eventually we got there. Large corporates or large organizations play a massive role in a co-working environment. If you have a meeting space, a coffee shop, or an events venue in a co-working space, it has the ability to trigger a huge amount of deal flow for those entrepreneurs, because they wouldn't have access to those individuals otherwise. So having a strategy meeting for Standard Bank in our space in Open Maboneng, it triggered an ability for a consulting firm to do some work with them in design thinking, which Standard Bank weren't investigating until quite recently. So those ideas where a person doesn't have access to individuals or potential deal flow is an organic approach to how successful entrepreneurs can be in a co-working environment. Again, it's non-facilitated. We don't say, let's make a direct introduction to the guys from Standard Bank, because they're there for a particular reason. But over a cup of coffee in a bar and at the bar, those guys get talking, and that doesn't often happen in a normal workspace or a normal meeting space. So the value proposition is quite clear from my side, but just to kind of go over for you guys as well, is that the sharing of resources creates a win-win. You can leverage off a resource multiple times. Think of it like this, a shared desk. We did a calculation towards the end of last year where one seat was used 4 times in a day in a hot desking space. We've got about 110 hot desking seats. Now, it doesn't mean that all 110 seats got used 4 times, but we did an average out, and it gets used at least twice a day, that same seat by different individuals. And if you look at your own offices, how many times or how many hours a day do you actually sit in your own seats? And if you're sitting in your own seat 8 hours a day, I'd suggest you stand up for a bit. The ability to find a network of spaces, both in virtual communities, creates extra value. So we've now shifted not only from creating a physical space, but also focusing very much on a virtual space. The idea of creating a virtual connection, or the ability for people to connect from Cape Town to Joburg, from Joburg to Durban, from Durban to Nairobi, it's easy as getting on Skype, but creating a community that is only particularly focused for that co-working business is hugely, hugely valuable. So we've created a platform called MyOpen, where our members profile themselves. They also say what they're looking for. They say, this is what I can offer, and this is what I'm looking for. And then people can connect. It creates an internal marketplace, and also creates an easy way for people to sell on their products at a discounted rate or test their products or ideas in a safe environment. So the virtual part is a massive, massive shift for us from just physical space, but into virtual. And then revenue models per square meter goes up. So I'll throw the real figures out here now. So in Open Maboneng, our per square meter rate in a blended environment is about 495 Rand per square meter that we're receiving in on income. In Workshop 17, it's closer to 900 Rand a square meter. So the idea is that it's not about trying to just break even or kind of make sure that it's a success by having a full space. Co-working space is hugely successful. Our starting price for a member is 1,200 Rand per person per month. That's for occasional use. It's 2,000 Rand per person per month for full-time access. So these barriers for membership are very low. If you can't make a business work at 2,000 Rand a month, and you've got full-time access to internet and an office space, I think you should reassess your business. The access to these abilities to these spaces and the memberships are really cost-effective. But you're also overselling. You're overselling like a gym does. There's a huge amount of breakage. So our capacity might be 300, but we have 350 memberships. And that's where the big upswing happens. So combining revenue streams with memberships and walk-ins, events and training, serviced offices, which we're actually also moving into right now because we are seeing a huge demand for small office environments, which we didn't really have beforehand. And if you're lucky enough to own the property, there's a huge upswing after 10 years. So our space in Maboneng, we bought at quite a reasonable price. We bought at 3,500 Rand a square meter. The property price was valued on the whole building at 6,000 squares or 5,500 squares. Was bought out by Arrowhead for 45 million Rand. So our property value went from pretty much 3.5 million Rand to close to 10 million Rand in 4 years. That's the success of rejuvenated areas as well. So the huge property upswing. And as a co-working owner, if you can own the property, you literally cut your operational costs in half, if not more, after 10 years because your rent disappears or your bond repayments go away. And then all of it is upside. And that's also a huge important factor to have is how do you go about ensuring the success for 10 years? And what do you put in place for 10 years as well? Furniture-wise, equipment-wise, services-wise. It's almost onerous to invest too much, but it's necessary to invest way more than you anticipate up front because over the longer term, it's going to benefit you. Writing it off over a period of time, 5 or 10 years. Furniture, we do all our own furniture design except for the chairs. Because what we found is that after 3 or 4 years, the table started to kind of break and buckle. And people don't make things to last anymore. They make things to kind of ensure that there's a high churn. So you buy something one day and the next year you have to buy it again, or you have to buy something new, or you have to get revamped. So we've actually invested a huge amount of time and energy in designing our own furniture and investing into materials that have a longer lead or longer lifetime, like bamboo, which is also quite an aesthetic product. So investing upfront is exceptionally important, and also future-proofing your spaces. So when I say future-proofing your space, you don't know what's going to happen in the next generation or the next 5 years in technology. So providing access to power, access to data, access to services, inducting, and service trays, that's hugely important. We actually almost always over-install service trays and always have more power access than needed. because you never know what's going to happen with that space. All right, and that's me, guys. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Sorry, I had quite a nice presentation planned for everyone, but time's not allowing it. But one valuable point that we have to make is here in the Tygerberg area, we've got everything, all the ingredients to make this community work. Everything ranging from the bustling entrepreneurs, including the foreign nationals who come to South Africa with nothing but end up running 5-6 businesses within the area. We've got the corporates, we've got Momentum, Cipla, the TFG Group, Sanlam, all just on our doorstep. We've got industrial areas within 3 kilometers all around the Voortrekker corridor. So it's about making all these come together into a kind of space where the GTP can take ownership and just be the political or the champion that is required in the space to ensure that our mandate gets delivered in revitalizing and regeneration in the area. So all this might seem chaos mixed and too different, but as George and Wesley pointed out, that it's needed because this all creates opportunity, an ecosystem and network. And we see this as an opportunity to create a network community within the Tygerberg area. And just to go forward and how this project should go forward and will go forward is we are going to undertake research to understand what kind of space is needed. As Wesley and George alluded to, that it's not just the co-working space as you were presented today, but you've got the accelerators, the incubator spaces, you got the more formal upper class type of looking co-working spaces compared to the community driven co-working spaces where it's arts and craft, and these different sectors also play a role in how these look. So we're excited about it, and we think that it's gained traction and it's gained a lot of excitement through the past couple of months, and we're hoping to just build on from this. So hopefully you guys are also excited, and if you guys are looking to move your office spaces and kind of shift your thinking, hopefully there will be a space in the northern suburbs soon that we can all reap the benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.